We're parents, teachers, and educators, and like you, we're passionate about restoring our culture for Christ. This is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education.
Hello again, this is Marlon Detweiler, and you have come to listen to Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Today we have with us Rob Shearer. Rob has a long and impressive history, not only with Veritas, but with homeschooling and influence there. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Marlon. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. Tell us, as we get started, I like to get a little bit of give a little personal touch. So tell us a little bit about you, your wife, and your family.
Oh, gosh. Well, born in Atlanta, Georgia. I can give you the long or the short story. Came up through the public school system, went off to college in North Carolina, Davidson College, now made famous by Steph Curry. And then went on to grad school on the West Coast, which was a cross-cultural experience for us. We got married right after I graduated college, and so we were newlyweds and transplanted ourselves from the South to the San Francisco Bay Area. That was an eye-opening experience, but I finished up a master's degree at Stanford and was pursuing a doctorate, but never finished my dissertation. So I taught college for a while. I did a variety of things in the corporate world. I worked in marketing. I worked for Coca-Cola for a while, actually. But along the way, we started a family. We had our first son was born in Germany while I was doing research for my doctorate. And then I was already teaching at Virginia Wesleyan College, history and philosophy. And our second child, a daughter, came along. And eventually we had 3 or 4 kids, and the oldest one was getting to be school age, and we're looking around, and we had never considered homeschooling. But there it was. It was kind of staring us in the face. I don't know whether
What year was that?
Let's see. He would have been 5 in 1985.
Okay.
So 37 years ago.
Yeah. That is early homeschooling.
Yeah, we were not the first, but we were kind of in that first wave. It was still in the 80s. In most states, there were legal issues. It was not necessarily legal to school your children at home in the 80s.
Yeah. We have I'm drawing a blank on the organization in Virginia to thank for helping to make it legal. Homeschool Legal Defense Association.
Yeah, HSLDA. Yeah.
So how many children do you have now? I know this is scary.
Oh, yeah. Well, we wound up, we didn't do it all at once. It took us 20 years, but we wound up with 12 children. And we now have...
you don't have any Roman Catholic roots either, do you?
No, and neither are we Mormon. You know, the neighbors have all asked, are you guys Mormon? No. And it was not an ideological statement by us. We're not trying to persuade everybody to have 12 children. We don't think that. We just enjoyed it. We enjoyed children. We adopted, we had 7 children. We found out about the plight of so many abandoned baby girls in China in the late 90s. And so we applied to adopt. As we applied to adopt, discovered we were pregnant. So we went from 7 to 9. 2 years later, it was such a rich, rewarding experience and a huge blessing for our family to have brought Corey home. Yeah. We decided to adopt a second time from China. And as we sent the application and discovered Cindy was pregnant again. So we had 4 under 4. And that was an adventure. I don't know that we could have carried that off had it not been for our older children helping us out, because we really had some middle schoolers and some teenagers, and so we had kind of built-in babysitters and assistants, and it really worked out. So we wound up with 11 children, and then we got a 12th. While we were teaching, we had a young lady who was in need of a home. She was in the care of Tennessee Department of Human Services, and she was one of our students. And they called us up and asked us if we would be an emergency placement for her. And I kind of looked at Cindy, and she looked at me, and we said, how do we say no? So we got our 12th child. She was already 17 when she came to live with us, and we became her guardian. So that was our number 12. And she's actually a month or 2 younger than all of our others. So it kind of completed the sequence there. And now the older ones, of course, are married and have families. We have 16 grandchildren and
unbelievable. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
16 grandchildren. Number 17 is due in December. And one of our daughters has 2 children that she and her husband are foster parents for, and they're hoping to adopt them. So sometime in 23, we'll probably go to 18 and 19, and then who knows? Any of them could decide to have more children, and I hope they do. I enjoy being Baba to all of those little kids.
Well, I mentioned early on that you really were pioneering as a homeschooler. And that took on some leadership roles and some business roles. Talk to us about that and how your education contributed to the career that led to the business that you and your wife have.
Sure. Well, as I say, the oldest one got to be school age. Cindy and I both went through the public schools, and we had never really thought much about it. Well, we were in Oklahoma when we happened to know a couple of families in our church there who were homeschooling their kids. They were slightly older. And we went to meet the kids, and I remember having this epiphany. It was a rather startling moment. I went to a family with 4 children. And we went to visit them at their house, and I started talking to the kids, and especially their middle school kids, the 6th, 7th, 8th grade kids. And they took me by the hand. They took me out in the backyard. They showed me the goats. They were telling me about the books they were reading. And Cindy and I have been working with youth groups at churches since we'd gotten married. And there's always kind of a little barrier. I mean, middle school and high school kids don't really talk to adults. They're so peer oriented that. And I was looking at this kid and I was going, "Who are you? And why are you talking to me? And why are we carrying on what really is a pretty adult conversation?" She knew quite a bit about raising goats, and I was learning things. So I came home to Cindy and I said, "We got to find out what these people are doing, because homeschooling seems to be working for this family." And Cindy did some research. I did some research. We went. This would have been the mid to late 80s. We went to a conference in Tulsa, a homeschool conference. We weren't yet homeschooling, and Edith Schaefer and Susan Schaefer Macaulay were the 2 keynote speakers.
Oh, wow.
And she had just published her book For the Children's Sake. And of course, we had both been huge admirers of Francis Schaeffer. I had been to L'Abri. We had both been to see Francis Schaeffer speak when he was touring with the film series, How Shall We Then Live? And so hearing Edith and Susan talk about homeschooling and seeing a whole bunch of other homeschoolers and seeing even in the early 80s, there was quite a bit of curriculum available, although not as much as the later explosion produced.
Right.
So we decided we would try it. And we tried it. We moved to Virginia about the time our oldest started school. We actually had Mike Ferris actually had to represent us before our county school board because they didn't want to give us a religious exemption to homeschool. So we had Michael Ferris himself as our attorney come represent us. Oh, yeah. And I think they were a little intimidated by him. So they granted us our exemption, and we homeschooled, and it's been off to the races since then. Cindy was really struggling trying to find a homeschool history curriculum for our kids that she liked. She never liked history. It was not her favorite subject.
Just for clarity purposes, this is before Veritas Press.
Yes, years before Veritas Press.
And we'll get to that, I know.
Before Greenleaf.
Yeah.
So she was trying to figure out how to teach the kids history because she didn't like any of the textbooks that she looked at. She looked at, Abeka and Bob Jones and the standard curriculum textbook publishers, and she didn't like them. They were boring. And Susan Schaefer Macaulay was a big deal about, using living books with kids, use biographies, use books that they're interested in. So one of our favorite weekend activities, a cheap date for, young marrieds with no money, is we'd go to used bookstores, and we'd just browse through used bookstores. So she found a couple of elementary school readers from 1904 called, what she found first was Famous Men of Rome. And then it turned out there were 3 other volumes that had been published in 1904, and they were about 30 biographies written for, at the time they were written, they were probably early elementary. Now we would judge them to be upper elementary, middle school level. And she brought them home and started teaching the kids out of these little stories. And she liked them so much, she came to me and said, Rob, these are out of print. They've been out of print for almost 100 years. We need to put them back in print. So this was the early days of laser printers and copy shops. And so I typeset it on the computer, and we printed off some copies with a Xerox machine and had them comb bound and started selling them. And eventually
let me just say something
Greenleaf
for
Press.
people that might have questions about what you did, Rob. It's also important to realize not only were they out of print, but they were in the public domain and out of copyright, which means anyone could do what you did with those books.
Exactly.
Legally permissible. Go ahead. Sorry for the
exactly. Yeah, copyright expires in about 75 years in those days. Anything published before about 1920 is now in the public domain. They keep changing it because Mickey Mouse is about to
Mickey
go
Mouse is
out
a
of copyright.
very powerful copyright protection.
They've revised the copyright 2 or 3 times to keep Mickey Mouse from becoming public domain. Anyway, so that became Greenleaf Press, and we eventually expanded those. We wrote study guides, which gave you some suggested discussion questions to go over with your children, how to adapt them to different age levels. We then began advocating for the homeschool community. You don't need to use textbooks. You can use living books. You can use biographies. You should use biographies. After all, the Bible teaches history with biography. If you actually look at the books of the Old Testament, most of them are history, and they're not textbook history. They are a series of biographies. You get the biography of Abraham and the biography of Isaac and the biography of Jacob and the biography of Moses and the biography of Joshua. The whole Old Testament history curriculum is a series of biographies, and it's designed to be taught to children. So we said, okay, start with the Bible, then do Egypt, Greece, Rome, Middle Ages, on down through modern times, and do a history sequence. And you mentioned my educational background. Yeah, the other part of the background there is I had the great good fortune when I was in college at Davidson in North Carolina. They had an integrated humanities program that they offered for freshmen and sophomores. It was a 2-year program. And you started with the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it was all original source material. You read original text, 100 pages a night, 5 nights a week for 2 years, and you finished with the existentialists. So I got to go through this fabulous program of an introduction to Western civilization and a reading of the classics. It was a classical education for someone who hadn't gotten one in public school, but now had this suddenly available, and I just kind of stumbled into it. Well, as it turned out, Stanford University, in its graduate program, offers a joint degree, a joint PhD in your discipline and humanities. And the humanities portion of the joint degree is a 2-year integrated chronological study of Western civilization that begins with the Epic of Gilgamesh and gets you all the way down to the existentialists. So I was like, oh yeah, sign me up. I would love to do that again, because it gave me a chance to go back and revisit people who had become some of my favorites. You know, I loved reading the classics, and I loved studying them. The graduate program was fabulous because you had people from all the different disciplines. You had people from the modern foreign languages, you had people from the sciences, you had people from sociology and economics, and they were coming in, and we were all reading these classical works of Western civilization together and discussing them in a graduate program at a graduate seminar level. So that, you know, when you guys did the Omnibus program, I was just like flipping out. I was going, oh yes, absolutely. This is wonderful. Omnibus. And now, of course, you know, you called me up. It's been almost 10 years. Can you believe that? This is my 9th year teaching for Veritas. You called me up.
Don't get too far ahead of yourself. We're still building this. All
right, we're building. We're building.
So now you've got this business that caters to the homeschool community and probably the Christian school community too. And you take it on the road, as many of those businesses did at that point, going in the summers, spring and summer, from one conference to another. We get interested in your product because of our initiating of the Geneva School in Orlando in 1992. And so we contact you to discuss what you're doing. And as we're prone to do, we like going to sources. And so we talked to you, and you were very gracious. And we had coordinated getting together for dinner in our home with your, at that point, who knows how many children, probably 8 or so at that point. And tell us a little bit about the surprise that we were in for when you got there.
Yeah, well, we were at the Orlando Curriculum Fair for all
That's
the
where we lived at
homeschoolers.
the time. That's right.
Yep, all the homeschoolers in the state of Florida get together once a year for a convention, and we had set up our booth, and we're displaying, because we sold not just the books we published, we sought out from other publishers living books that we could put into a catalog and sell packages and sell readers and that sort of thing. So yeah, you guys came by and talked and invited us to come to dinner, and we showed up, and you did have a surprise guest at the dinner that you did not warn me about. But R.C. Sproul was at your home and greeted us along with you. And I was like, okay, deep breath. You're sitting next to R.C. Sproul. Don't say anything stupid.
I didn't remember that he was there.
He was there, and you hadn't warned us. But yeah, we rolled up to your house in what we were then touring with. We figured out we were doing about 60 or 70 nights a year on the road with six kids. I think it was 6 at that point.
Well, it seemed like more than 6.
It eventually got to be 12, but at that point there were only 6 traveling with us. So we were doing 60 or 70 nights on the road at curriculum fairs and hauling a trailer full of books. We had a 15-passenger van, but we're having to book hotel rooms everywhere we went. And so I ran the numbers at one point. Chris, we were based out of the Nashville area, and I knew people in the music business, and one of them suggested to me, it's actually economical to have your own coach with bunk beds and a bedroom for you and your wife and a kitchen, and you'd actually spend less money doing that than staying in hotels all the time. So when you say
coach, that's synonymous with recreational vehicle or RV, I assume.
It is, although they tend to use the big Greyhound coaches, the MC3s, and now the Prevos. So we looked around, and as it turned out, one of our neighbors in our county was Charlie Daniels. And Charlie Daniels was buying a new coach. He was buying a big brand new Prevo and selling his old one. And so we contacted him and bought his coach to use for Greenleaf Press. And didn't really have to do much to change it. He had a sitting area in the front with some exercise equipment. We did redo the front compartment with 6 bunk beds for our kids. The middle compartment was a bedroom with a queen size bed that Cindy and I slept in, and the back compartment was a kitchen. And it worked great. We only had to make one small change to the exterior. When we bought it, he had on the front on either side dead buffalo skulls, kind of a Western motif on either side. And that really didn't go over too well in the homeschool community. So we had that part of the coach repainted and put our Greenleaf Press logo with the lamb underneath the tree. And
when you first drove that into Georgia, is there any truth to the rumor that it broke out with the fiddle song about Devil Went Down to Georgia?
I had several people at truck stops come up to me because they would recognize the bus, especially before we painted out the dead skulls, and they wanted to see Charlie. I was like, Charlie's not, I'm sorry, Charlie's not on the bus. But yeah, we had people occasionally come up and want to try and see Charlie and get an autograph.
Too funny. So you came to our home and we had to find a place to park. Our neighbors put up with it for a couple hours. I don't remember any complaints, but I'm glad you didn't spend the night. I got to tell you, they might've been a little upset about that. But because of that and that relationship, you availed yourselves to you and your wife, to Laurie and me, and were really encouraging in what we thought was going to be a hobby business activity of creating a history and Bible curriculum in the form of those flashcards that were the foundation of Veritas Press. What's your recollection of how that played out?
I remember you guys calling up and asking very sweetly, would we mind if you produce some flashcards to go alongside the famous men books? And I thought it was a terrific idea. In fact, I said, if you guys do that, would you let us sell them in our catalog along with our famous men books? And you and Laurie said reciprocally, could we sell your famous men books in our catalog? And I said, absolutely, it's fine. So we really did have kind of a partnership there where we sold each other's products and cooperated. And the flashcards were fabulous. They were a real boon. We included them in our study packages. So yeah.
Yeah, these are things I didn't actually know until now, and that's really cool. I'm glad there was a good symbiotic reciprocation. Wonderful. So that was a real help and an encouragement that kind of green lighted us to jump in. You then jumping, I guess, a few years forward, have been involved with, I don't know what your status, maybe you formed it and started it, I don't know, but I'll call it what it is, and then you can tell me what happened and where you are with it today, the Schaefer Study Center.
Yep. I mentioned Francis Schaefer early on. He really is a huge hero for Cindy and me both. So we were homeschooling our kids, and at the high school level, as you know, the homeschool community sort of splits. There are a lot of people who homeschool through the elementary grades, but don't really feel confident enough to teach high school classes. So a number of different kinds of innovative experiments have occurred along the way, mostly co-op arrangements where parents sometimes swap teaching subjects to each other. We wanted to start something that was a little bit like a co-op, but actually didn't necessarily require all the parents to teach, but recruited teachers who had subject matter expertise in history or literature or art or the sciences. So Cindy and I had taught classes in various co-ops in Nashville, 3 or 4. And we finally said, let's do it ourselves, and let's implement the chronological history curriculum that we've developed. And so we actually did start the Francis Schaefer Study Center. It's now going on its 17th, 18th year. It started way back in the early 2000s. And we meet on Wednesdays. We have a kind of a university model school. We have one day of live classes where all the students come in, and our home church very graciously has adopted and sponsored and endorsed that as a ministry to the Nashville community. And so we transform the church into a school. I call it sort of the Brigadoon School. It comes into existence on Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. And by 6 o'clock that night, it disappears and leaves no trace. All day long, we'll have sometimes 30 or 40 or 50 high school kids. Right now, we've got a little bit fewer than that, but they're taking classes in the ancient world for the 9th graders, and then the 10th graders do medieval Ren Ref, the 11th graders do early modern, and the seniors do the modern world. And I teach history for all 4 years. Cindy teaches literature for all 4 years. We have 2 art historians. The students are required to take an art history class along with the history and literature classes. So it's a little bit like Omnibus, except it's team taught.
Yeah.
So the core for each year is really 3 hours of instruction on a Wednesday with 3 different teachers. You have a history teacher, a literature teacher, and an art historian.
Oh, wow.
And we do 1 hour of live in-class instruction, and then they have a reading syllabus for the things that they're required to do over the other 4 days of the week before they come back again, and we review a little bit, and we introduce new material, and we spend our hour. But the ability to get 3 hours of instruction really on different aspects of the same time period. So if we're studying ancient Rome, I'm doing the history, Cindy's doing the literature, she's talking about the Aeneid, and our art historians are talking about the architecture and the accomplishments of the Romans in that field. And it works. It really works. It works. Awesome. It's a slight variation on what VSA does, but it works, and I really enjoy participating in both. So we've been doing that now for 17 years.
Yeah. Well, now you mentioned briefly, and I cut you off. Now it's time to talk. What do you do here?
I teach in the Omnibus program, which I dearly love. It's the highlight of my week every week, getting together with these high school students and reading the classics. I teach Omni 2 secondary and Omni 5 primary, and have done that now. This is my 9th year doing it. Omni 2, I could do a whole sales pitch for you on this, but Omni 2 secondary, well, let me just say this. The Omnibus curriculum each year has a primary course and a secondary course. Primary course are the original authors from that time period. The secondary course is more focused on historical fiction and background and related material. So when I do 2 secondary, and 2 is the Middle Ages, Renaissance Reformation. When I do 2 secondary, the nickname for that course is the Year of Tolkien. Because we start with The Hobbit And then we read all 3 volumes of The Lord of the Rings. Now, we do a lot of other things as well, but that's probably about half the year.
Yeah.
So it has been my great pleasure, my great privilege for the last 9th year now to take 8th graders and walk them through The Hobbit and walk them through all 3 volumes of The Lord of the Rings and talk to them. I actually introduced a whole class period in there, little innovation in the Omni curriculum that was my invention, on why J.R.R. Tolkien is the greatest author of the 20th century. It's not kid literature. It's not escapist. It's not just fantasy. He ranks in the pantheon with Shakespeare and Chaucer. And this is not an original thesis of mine. Tom Shippey, his successor at Leeds University, has written a book with just that title, Why J.R.R. Tolkien is the Greatest Author of the 20th Century. So it's a wonderful course to teach. The other course, Omni 5, equally a pleasure. We're right now in the middle of Dante. We just finished Inferno yesterday.
Wow. Yep.
And we'll be moving on this year. We will cover, Purgatorio and Paradiso as well. And that's a huge part of the year. But then we're also we start with Augustine's City of God. We do Boethius. We'll do Chaucer. We'll do Luther and Calvin and read some original material from them. We'll actually have a wonderful week where we study Johann Sebastian Bach, and we don't have a reading assignment for the students. We have a listening assignment.
Yeah.
They listen to the St. Matthew Passion.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful, I enjoy it every year, and I learn things every year. I see things new in the material as I reread it. And the students every year produce insights that I have not seen before. And it's true still this year. I've already learned things from my students that I didn't know before about Augustine and Boethius, and I'm sure they'll continue to surprise me as we go through.
I'm smiling so much because I hear the joy that I express this way. I love the ability to do what I love and get paid to do it.
Well, you may have heard Bob Cannon, because he started quoting me, and I don't mind. I have said it. I would teach omnibus classes for free.
Yeah, I'm the wrong person to tell that to, because if anybody's going to take you up on it, it's going to be me.
Well, no, there's a caveat, but you have to pay me to grade papers.
That's great. I love this note. I love the footnote. Hey, you said something at an end of year gathering that I was so encouraged by that I want to hear it again, and I want our listeners to hear it. And it was an observation that you made about VSA students. Tell us again.
VSA students, and this again, I'm not the first one to make this comment, and I'm not the only one on the faculty who has voiced this enthusiastically and passionately, but the VSA students that I have taught for 9 years now are the best students I have ever taught in my lifetime. They are enrolled at VSA because they want to be there. They are readers. They joyfully go through the material, and they come in with questions and observations, and they have been and continue to be a true joy to teach. They are the best students I have ever taught in my life.
I'm gonna follow that up by saying something that you wouldn't say. That is because we have the best collection of teachers in the world. And teachers are the most important part of education. We're thrilled with the curriculum that we can offer, but we're even more thrilled with the fact that we have the best collection of teachers in the world. And that produces the best students. There are some students that come in and you're pushing them the direction that they're running. Those are the easy ones. Then you have students who aren't ready for the work. They're not interested in that kind of work, and they get won over. They get won over by the teachers who have won over other students first, and now everything conspires to do that for those students. And so for those that are listening, I hope you hear this, because this is a chance to be a student of Rob Shearer's and his contemporaries in ways that will make the most wonderful difference in your kids' lives forever. So thank you for being a part of that.
It's been a joy. And I have to say, I'll endorse that, not to blow my own horn, but because of my interaction with the other teachers you have hired. And I will absolutely confirm the teachers you have hired, along with Dr. Bob, are incredibly impressive. In fact, a little intimidating. When I go to the end of year gathering meetings and I see these people, or when I'm in an Adobe Classroom, we have faculty meetings in the Adobe Classroom. They're a little intimidating because they're all so bright and so passionate and so articulate. They have multiple degrees. They have subject matter expertise. And you can tell they love the students. They pray for the students. We put up prayer requests for each other and reach out to each other. They mentor new teachers and hold their hand and offer them support and affirmation. It is a remarkable collection of teachers. I have been just incredibly blessed by my association with the rest of the faculty. I feel myself sometimes a little bit inadequate when I look at all of them and all of their accomplishments, and I go, oh my gosh, I hope I can live up to the standards that they are setting and keep the pace that they set, because these people are really good.
Yeah, that's great. Folks, you have been listening to Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. And maybe a little bit of a different closing note. If you happen to have an RV and are in the Franklin, Nashville area, go ahead and try it. Show up at Rob's house and see if he's ready to pay it forward for dinner. Rob, thanks so much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Marlon.